So I can fairly say that we played through a couple of pretty solid encounters. In fact, to the point where, where it was pretty climactic. Briefly, you probably, in the first few parts, I don't know if you got to the point where they're fighting the dog creatures. There's a sequence where they're basically ambushed by a pack of human-faced dogs, and that plays out in what I consider to be fairly suitable choreographic fashion. I mean, you have a theater of the mind thing going on, but you also have a very strong set of means by which people describe what they do. And so we knew where everybody was. We had a good, strong idea of what happened. And then through, I offered the choice to a couple. I decided, since we had 3 people there and we're sort of pushing the system, I actually offered the choice to 2 players simultaneously. So therefore I had 2, components to work with, rather than just one. And that worked out fine. I'm trying to see where to go with this. Okay. First of all, we could talk more about what happened in that session. Second, we can talk about I think it's really important that I really articulate where I think you're at with this design and what my consulting points will be. Briefly, I'm going to go with that. So it's going to sound like it's coming out of left field. Briefly, you have over-purposed an immense number of small-scale mechanics. You cleared that a little bit. You cleared that by saying, okay, well, we're only going to spend our K one way during play, right? Instead of spending it for rerolls, you're going to spend it for descriptive additions. But let's take a look at things. Okay, we've got rerolls, we've got descriptive additions, and we've got abilities, getting new abilities, and we've got a couple of other things that can be achieved, whether they, whatever they may be. The ways you get to those things, there's often multiple ways in which you get there to one of those. You can get it through this kind of points, you can get it through that kind of points, you can get it through these outcomes. And you've also got a multitude of things to keep track of that factor into the process, one of which is dread, one of which is the conditions of your character of all kinds. There's many points that you're tracking. What I'm saying is that instead of being a kind of a rich tapestry, it blends together because each one of them, many of them will steer or permit the same thing in the long run. So one thing that I could say as a thought experiment is to blowtorch it and say, look, there's one way you get rerolls, one kind of point, and you get it one kind of way. And then there's one thing over here by which you can take rests. And that's what it is. You have that one way. You have one way of putting in input. So, for example, you have instincts as an ability, and that allows you to put input into the scenario and into the immediate situation. So you exhaust your instincts and you say, aha, there's a place to hide up there on that mountainside. There's a cave. We can go hide in there. But that's exactly what you were able to do by spending our K as well. So what I'm saying is it's time to kind of blowtorch it all and say there's one way to get content into the immediate situation. Just one. No ability will mimic it, or if it's an ability, then no point resource will mimic it. Just blowtorch that into one way to do it. And the same thing goes for everything. So there's one way to I don't know, just find all the things that can happen and say there's just one mechanic that does that with a name. Now, I suppose you could have different abilities and things that each invoke that mechanic. That's fine. I'm not saying there's only one thing on the entire game, that one way that a character can do it, but I'm saying that the thing is just that thing. And so you don't have other crisscrossing ways to get there. Because the players were a little bit overwhelmed with, wait, I can just put that into the game now? But I had to spend an arcade for that. He just does it by exhausting an ability, that kind of thing. They weren't carping along the way, but I was referring not to their statements. I was referring to their use and their behaviors toward their sheets. So I paid a lot of attention to how they interacted with their sheets and each other and the fiction. A good example, at the end, one of the players said that they really, severely hated the Havoc. Just hated it. It was too coarse-grained, and they felt like they just rolled and then they were stuck. Now, this is, in literal terms, not really very substantive, because the Havoc system is no different from any number of games with a fairly solid amount of fictional resolution per roll, right? It's not really, it's not excessively coarse-grained. It doesn't solve like a whole scene, right? And it's and you have a fair amount of narration going into it. You have a fair amount of narration coming out of it. There's nothing really, distinctively non-immersive about the Havoc system. Okay. It meant that I had to look at what it was that was not helping that player. I had to look across all the Havoc that we did and say, what is it about that player's interaction with the system that clearly, unit by unit by unit, roll after roll after roll, they seemed less and less into it. And I could spot it right away. Okay. Abilities exhaustion. That player, I found the place in the scenario where the player said, wait a minute. So after I exhausted, I can't do it. And at that point, stopped using abilities. This was a player who did not like to run out. And was absolutely disenchanted with the idea that once they exhausted instincts, that they couldn't do it again. Does their character have it or don't they? And the ambiguity about that was unacceptable to that player. And so therefore, in Havoc, they didn't exhaust abilities, and so therefore felt like they were just rolling naked in a completely dice-based way without their character actually factoring into the Havoc. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So but it also did cause me to look across and say, all right, what is stable about the character across play? Ability, exhaustion and no exhaustion. And the answer is very little. Very little. You have such a powerful resource-based approach to activity that for this player, and the reason I bring it up is because I saw this evident in the way they played, not in, like I say, this isn't something they said afterward. What they said afterward indicated dissatisfaction, and that's all. So, right. So the issue here, which I think is real, is that you're looking at your sheet, and it is very hard to think of the character as able to do things. What can my guy do? There's a very thin bank of the things that they all can, have, and will be able to do throughout play. And that and so either one says, look, this whole thing is resource. The fact that you can't get the mechanical benefit of a mounted charge again after you did it is just something you have to live with. And to this player, and I think it was a real phenomenon, because this player was actually quite into their character and had done a rather good job of making an extremely coherent character, had been careful to maintain a pure soul, from the start, wanted the character to be very much in the, in the zone of full up, competent, doesn't have to play this versus that, from the start, didn't mind going somewhere with that stuff, but at the moment was just inclined. They wanted to play it was kind of the equivalent of wanting to play a fighter in D&D. Screw the nuances. I want a block of playability here. And that's what I want. And so that's why that character is a person playing that character is sort of a good indicator of saying, all right, what does this character want to see? What does this player want to see? This player wants to see the default. This player doesn't want to, well, if you spin this plate in the air and then you spend that point and then you, risk this and then you, do all the ifs, then what happens? No, this player says, I want to know what happens without all the ifs. What happens if I just go in and freaking play this character? And what they found was that the character just disappeared in between their fingers. They used a thing and then they felt like, okay, that's gone. My character can't do it. It's off the sheet. It's, my sheet gets smaller. And all I have is a couple words of description to go by for, anything. And they didn't want to spend anything away. They felt like they're erasing their sheet. So at that point, all they've got is this sort of naked havoc and a little bit of bargaining about, like, can I make it a little more consequential for a little less risk and vice versa, if I can do that. And that's all they've got. So they feel like it was just like talking between them and me and these dice. And that's all they were doing. They didn't feel like their character was using those dice. So I think a big part of that is that, yes, you've got this immense effort in your design toward resource management, and I want to honor that. Let's keep resource management important. But does it have to be resource management in order to play at all? Where is the line? When you play a character, you pick up a character sheet. I've looked at a lot of character sheets now, not as many as you, but I've looked, I've looked at a lot of character sheets and seen them in play, and I say, all right, what here can I be assured of playing at all? That I know I've got this. And if that's against your intended design, if you want the characters to always be on the bleeding edge of what they can and cannot do because they've used it already, then that's an important part of your design. And I'm not saying get rid of it. What I'm saying is that as an important part of the design, and even so, even if you do have like a bank of abilities that, don't exhaust, you're always going to get a +1 in this, you're done. Even if you do have that, we're still going to focus on resource management because that's where your whole game is, really. But keep in mind that at the moment, you've gone all the way. The character sheet is simply not accessible unless you are losing pieces of it as you go. And to many people, not just this one player, they're going to say, but I made a character who's good at riding a horse. How come I'm not good at riding my horse anymore? All that remains, if I'm good at riding my horse in play, it means that I'm no longer good at it. Why? I don't like it. I made this character so that I could ride my horsey all the fucking time. So, how come I got to exhaust this in order to get my reroll while I'm riding my horse? Now, there are a few things in there that remain, but they're really precious few. that would say, one might say, well, you get lots of that stuff back at a rest. Take a rest, it comes back. So it wasn't really gone. It was narratively gone. It's not really gone. Take a rest and you've got it. It just means that we don't like seeing the same damn thing over and over and over again. But again, to a certain way of looking at it, they really feel as though they're erasing it from their capability as a player in a fashion that violates their sense of this character actually even existing. So I'm saying that whatever it is, there's a place between the features that remain and are always accessible to play versus the features that are exhausted. There is a place that if you haven't considered it, you should decide. If you're going to push it all the way so that, everything is exhausted or nearly everything, that's fine. But know that that's a choice and that you could raise that threshold slightly so that more things are constantly available.